South Park dropped their first episode of 2024, The End of Obesity, a 50-minute special commenting on Ozempic, body positivity, and the American healthcare system. While the show usually mocks emerging cultural trends, The End of Obesity starts with showrunner Trey Parker admitting that he is using Ozempic. Does this complicate the message? Well, let's find out. But first, a quick recap. A trip to the doctor reveals that Cartman's dream of a slim waist is just a weekly injection away. Semaglutides like Ozempic, Mounjaro, and Wegovy are a breakthrough in weight management medication, but insurance only covers it if you have diabetes. Unable to pay out of pocket, Cartman is instead prescribed a cheaper alternative, Lizzo, or essentially body positivity. Meanwhile, a squad of MILFs obsessed with flaunting their Ozempic bods seduce Randy into joining their Ozempic-fueled ragers. Kyle offers to help Eric file an insurance claim to get the semaglutides paid for, but their efforts are thwarted by the labyrinthian, Kafka-esque nightmare that is the American healthcare system.
I almost died!
So the boys order raw semaglutide from an Indian factory and start a compounding pharmacy to make the drugs accessible to everyone. They succeed in giving Cartman his first treatment, but the minor curbing of his appetite for cereal bombs on the toilet leads to negligible results. When the sugar cartel, comprised of cereal mascots, learns that obesity drugs are curbing people's cravings for sugar, they panic that body positivity might not be enough to keep poor people hooked on their product, especially if they're made widely available. So they burn down the factory in India and set their sights on compounding pharmacies. Crackdowns on semaglutide abuse deplete the MILF's injection supply, driving them to rob a pharmacy and eventually the boys' compounding clinic. Unable to afford Ozempic to curb her appetite, Sharon is put on Lizzo to curb her appetite to lose weight. Eventually, she internalizes Lizzo so thoroughly that she develops diabetes, making her now viable for Ozempic.
With your condition, you're finally eligible for semaglutides.
The boys find a new source of semaglutide, but the MILFs and Sugar Mafia launch an attack to hijack the shipment. They manage to shake them off, but are once again thwarted by the insurance companies. Randy comes clean with Sharon about using Ozempic, and together they decide that if they're gonna take drugs, might as well be fun ones. In the end, Kyle says there are so many forces working to make you unhealthy that relying on willpower alone is impossible, so fat people should no longer be ridiculed. Cartman, of course, takes full advantage. The end. In some ways, South Park is playing the hits with the commentary in this episode. Trey once again targets narcissism, corporate greed, and personal responsibility. The first two are pretty obvious. People will go to any length and transgress any standard of decency to inflate their egos, and corporations are eager to capitalize on this. So a medicine originally designed to treat a chronic disease pivots to the more profitable market of addressing rich people's vanity. If universal applicability gets in the way of profitability, the amalgam of corporate interests will price out the poor or make the process of procuring it so absurd that it reaches fifth-dimensional complexity. They'll then back a cultural movement, in this case body positivity via Lizzo, that keeps you consuming until you develop diabetes, or diabetes, at which point you've become a lifelong patient and the poor can be integrated back into the system profitably.
It's something you'll have to manage for the rest of your life. But that's really good news. Now I can write you a prescription for Ozempic.
This leads to probably the best South Park line in years.
Rich people get Ozempic, poor people get body positivity.
Brings a new meaning to let them eat cake. Any attempt to provide more equitable alternatives will not only face opposition by antagonistic corporate interests, but quashed by the much scarier and much more powerful, slow-moving bureaucratic machine. This dude could have stepped right out of Terry Gilliam's nightmarish masterpiece about bureaucratic totalitarianism, Brazil. By the way, I have to mention the fax machine you can hear in the background. Now, I haven't lived in America for almost 3 years, but the last time I dealt with the American healthcare system, doctor after doctor, insurance agent after insurance agent would request faxes, an almost 200-year-old technology. Here in Finland, nobody uses fax machines. Then again, if the goal is to wear people down until they give up in exhaustion, it's the perfect tool.
They just purposely make it difficult for people to pay for what they need.
But where I think the episode gets interesting is in its take on willpower.
You gotta have some willpower, okay?
Traditionally, South Park is known for preaching the necessity of personal responsibility, highlighting how people will jump through hoops to abdicate responsibility and blame their problems on others, but that ultimately we should aspire to get our act together and own up to the changes we can make in our lives. Most famously, in the South Park movie, all the mothers blame Canada for warping their children's minds with the Terrence and Phillip movie, instead of taking responsibility for taking an active role in discussing media with their kids.
You never took the time to talk to me. Whenever I get in trouble, you go off and blame everybody else.
Or in the Emmy-winning episode Margaritaville about the 2008 economic crash, there's an ongoing gag in which the Randys of the world blame external forces for their economic woes while throwing money at dumb stuff like margarita machines. Or in the Tweek's Coffee episode, Tweek's dad blames the Harbucks Corporation for unethically driving small businesses under, instead of acknowledging that his coffee is subpar.
Doesn't have that bland, raw sewage taste that Tweek's coffee has.
I could go on. But that's not quite what we hear in this episode. At the end, Kyle basically says that food producers, insurance companies, medical professionals, and cultural forces are exerting so much pressure to keep people overweight and unhealthy that relying on willpower or personal responsibility is insufficient.
How can anyone have willpower when all these forces are manipulating us every day? It's impossible.
So, is this an about-face for South Park? I think, yes, that on one level, Trey, a bona fide billionaire, is saying, if I can't keep my weight in order with pretty much the cushest life imaginable, then we can't expect poor people juggling 2 jobs to do so either. But on another level, I think that this episode also reflects the impact of medicalization, or the process of framing human experiences and behavior as medical issues.
And obesity is a disease. Oprah Winfrey said so.
Now, to be clear, sometimes thinking of human behavior in the language of symptoms can lead to improvements in people's lives and is a mark of progress. However, other times, things are medicalized not because doing so reflects advancement in medical knowledge, but because reinterpreting human experience in medical terms can lead to new opportunities for investment. In the episode, Sharon frames a lack of willpower as grounds for a medical intervention.
But I just don't have the same kind of willpower he has.
And Cartman frames it as the essential treatment for his condition.
Knowing there's a cure, knowing I can have willpower injected into my body.
Therefore, a lack of willpower is redefined from a temporary moment of weakness that can be overcome to a static condition that can't improve without external help. This is then reinforced by cultural forces like Lizzo, who, in this satirical context, elevate it from a condition to an identity. When this happens, Lizzo becomes more than just an excuse for a lack of willpower, it can actually perpetuate it. And for that, we're going to have to discuss the philosopher Ian Hacking and his concept of the semantic contagion. In 1995, Hacking published the book Rewriting the Soul, which I briefly mentioned in my recent video on The Mask. In it, he investigates the shocking rise in diagnoses of multiple personality disorder in the 80s and early 90s, which had been relatively rare before this period. Through his exhaustive study of the phenomenon, Hacking came to the conclusion that this rise could be explained in part by semantic contagion. Semantic contagion refers to the way in which the language and concepts surrounding a particular condition can proliferate through society, impacting how people understand and experience their own identities and mental states. This process can lead to an increase in the diagnosis and manifestation of certain conditions as more people become familiar with and internalize these concepts. In the 80s and 90s, movies, books, and TV shows began to feature characters with multiple personalities, bringing the concept into public awareness. Therapists and psychiatrists influenced by these cultural representations and new diagnostic criteria began to diagnose multiple personality disorder much more frequently. As people learned about MPD, some began to interpret their own experiences and symptoms through this lens, leading to more cases being reported and diagnosed. The point is, the categories and labels used in medical settings are not merely passive descriptors, but can actively shape the way individuals experience and express their mental health. And I think we can say something similar happens with the concept of willpower. A lack of willpower, once thought of as a medical designation, can then manifest as people interpret their experiences through this new medicalized lens. They can then internalize it and even embrace it as part of their identity, which is music to the ears of the sugar mafia and the pharma companies. Once corporate influence permeates language, it can suck us into a Kafka trap as sinister as the fax machine guy, especially when it comes to the concept of willpower. When you medicalize willpower, it no longer becomes a question of will. Philosophically, will is an affirmation of our ultimate freedom to make decisions independent of external circumstances. But once willpower gets co-opted by medicalized language, it becomes a symptom, an unfreedom, something that can only be addressed by external medical action. When you redefine will, you redefine and perhaps even dilute the concept of freedom altogether. So let's return to Trey's confession at the beginning and Kyle's call for change at the end. Is it that a rich guy can no longer preach personal responsibility while he's injecting Ozempic? If he does, is his position akin to the MILFs who take Ozempic while lying about diet and exercise? Can he no longer espouse the virtues of responsibility when his $1 billion shields him from the external pressures that compromise everyone else's personal responsibility? Or is Trey just another pawn in the system like us, whose understanding of willpower has been so distorted that it can no longer be exercised? Probably the first one, but second one is interesting to think about. Overall, I thought the episode was pretty good. It's nice to see Trey leaning into the social commentary with all these specials, but I will say I'm more of a fan of episodes when Kyle and Cartman are at each other's throats, and this episode had them cooperating for 99% of the runtime. Either way, always grateful for new South Park episodes and can't wait for season 27. As always, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to check me out on my Ko-fi page where you can donate to the channel. A huge thank you to everyone who has recently donated. Every single one makes a big difference for the channel. Don't forget to follow me on Letterboxd, check out the Discord, follow me on Twitch. All of those links are in the description, so be sure to click them all, and hope you guys are having an awesome summer. Take it easy. Peace.